The way that we stand the best chance of moving forward with this isn't just by having the staff drive it, but I think by having our members talk to the representatives, not coming to DC, but by talking to them in their districts as constituents that are being impacted.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Dave Cann, National Organizing Director for the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, the largest federal employees union. The union that I'm a member of represents some 800,000 federal workers across the country. Dave, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Jacob, it's good to be here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. So I guess, because this just happened, we just went through another shutdown fight. I guess what are some of your thoughts coming off of that? And, it looks like we were able to avoid that, and the government is funded for the next 3 months again. What are some of your initial thoughts and some of the, the reaction from the union coming off of yet another seemingly meaningless shutdown fight?
I think our expectation is that we're going to be facing a lot more attacks. This was an arbitrary and functionally meaningless attack on the ability of the federal government to do its work. And it was conducted without any real concern for the welfare of the federal employees, obviously, but for the work that we do for the American people. And seeing that be interrupted or interfered with or upended is something we expect to see a lot more of in the next 4 years. When the Trump administration and the accompanying illegitimate DOJ committee say that they want to attack the work that the federal government does, it's based on, in some ways, a misunderstanding of what the federal government does, or a lack of understanding. Not understanding that there are millions of people who are regular Americans who do the work, and that it's, in essence, the notion of a presidential administration declaring war on Americans, doing work that serve regular Americans. There's an ignorance of that's fundamental to it. But I think at the same time, there's an awareness that there are things that the federal government does, like maintaining the rule of law, like making sure that our drinking water is clean and that polluters don't pollute, like making sure that the food we eat is safe and that food processors keep it clean, making sure that the manufacturing gets done in this country does so with respect for workers' rights and the environment. There's an intentional attack on those things, and the guardrails that prevented the Trump administration last time from being able to fully let loose on the interests of capital, as you would have said, which I agree with, are in some ways kept in check by the regulations that have been attacked by the stripping of Chevron deference by the Supreme Court in the last term, and by the federal servants who do the work of protecting the American people and their interests. And so we can't be caught unprepared. And this was, even before they're officially in place, an effort to disrupt the work of the government from going forward.
There is a conservative radio host in Nashville. He came from Birmingham, and that's how I knew him. And he said something on Twitter about, if the federal government ceased to function, what do you think the first thing you would notice would be? What would you miss first? How long would it take? And, so here he's making trying to make a broader point about generally the uselessness of the federal government. And he got testy. He got his feelings hurt when I responded that it would be noticed the same hour, obviously, because we're not talking about, most shutdowns. There's typically continuing funding for some of the essential services, or there is, some provision for people to continue going to work, and just on the assumption that you're going to get paid back later. But if the federal government ceased functioning, I said that would obviously be noticed the same hour. VA hospitals would close. Federal prison guards would go home. Flights would be grounded because the air traffic controllers would go home. Seniors wouldn't get their Social Security checks. Medicare stops paying hospital bills. And, that's just the first 5 things off the top of my head. And, he got all offended. He was like, well, what was I don't mean what would you notice on CNN? I mean, what would affect you personally? And it's like, that's not what you wrote, but also that would affect me personally because my grandmother is reliant on those things. And if she were to become destitute, we would have to immediately have like a big family meeting about what are we going to do with our grandmother that requires 24/7 care that we're only able to do because partly we take shifts taking care of her and partly we are able to hire help because of the support from the VA, Social Security, and Medicare, right? And so that's immediately right there a personal impact on me and everybody. And that's like 70% of what the government does is Medicare, Social Security, and the VA, right? And so these are not small things. And so it is frustrating to see this kind of attempt to paint the federal government as something that is not relevant to people's lives. And of course, there's all sorts of other stuff, like you said, keeping the tap water clean. That's not something that's going to be noticed immediately, but we'll notice it once people start dying of dysentery so corporations can make a profit again, right? And it's just so frustrating to see stuff like that. And so what are you hearing from the members whose congressional representatives are kind of going along with these outright lies on us?
Generally speaking, it's a response of anger. And one of the things that I've seen that's been heartening is in a situation where folks know that their livelihoods are under attack, where there are proposals to cut the federal service by 75%, where there are discussions about abolishing entire departments, and this is what this is how people pay their bills. This is how people take care of their families. People, I think, are also upset because there's so much The reason people work in federal jobs, in part, is because in significant part, is because they believe in the work they're doing. They really care about it. It's oftentimes less well compensated than work that gets done in the private sector.
You mean to tell me that National Labor Relations Board attorneys don't do it to get rich?
Exactly. And so seeing the work that they do and the way they support their community, the way they support their country, attacked is something people take real umbrage with. And so we've seen folks come together and talk about how they can protect themselves and the mission in a way that I think is art. It's what labor is about.
Right.
Having people understand their shared interest and the value of the work that they do.
There's a labor attorney who does kind of freelance stuff now, but he used to work for the National Labor Relations Board. At one point, he was fired. His name is Matt Brunig, and he does like policy analysis and stuff like that. Does a little bit of punditry on the side too. And he said that immediately when he was fired, he got corporate labor law firms, management side law firms, calling him, offering him to double his salary. Immediately after having been fired from the NLRB. And so, like, that kind of stuff, those kinds of opportunities are available to every single person that works in an agency like that protects normal working people and consumers from corporations. Every single one of those folks who work at the EPA, who work at the NLRB, who work at OSHA, could go work for a corporate law firm or some such thing for probably double the money. And they don't, because they care about the mission, like you said. And so, yeah, it's just, we could go on and on about how frustrating that is. But one of the things that is one of the things that's been going around is these stats that they're telling people about telework. Can you tell us what folks like Joni Ernst are saying about federal workers and what the truth of the matter is?
Yeah, and there's a lot of misinformation is maybe more generous than I want to be there. I think they're lying because I think they know. Right. There's a lot of lies being told about federal workers not doing work, and B, not being in the workplace to do the work. As you mentioned, more than half of all of the workers that do the job can't do any of it remotely. If you're taking care of veterans or working for the Department of Defense, or the Coast Guard, or again, as I talked about before, inspecting meat or water, or any of the work that over the over 70 agencies we represent, or the millions of federal employees, most of them do not have the option to work remotely. So when I don't know if it was Jerry Ernst, I want to say it was, said that 6% of the federal employees show up into the office, over 70% of the work that gets done by federal employees gets done in person. That said, there's something called the Telework Enhancement Act from 2010, which recognized that for people that have the option to do telework, for people that can work remote is sort of a misnomer, actually, because remote means people that never work in an office, and that's less than 10% of federal employees. But for folks that can do some of the work away from the facility, they want them to, because we pay through GSA a significant amount to have a footprint of big federal office buildings. And if we can have folks working from home, they commute less, they get to spend more time and energy on their job, they tend to be happier, they tend to be more productive. And there's a wealth of research that bears this out, which is why Telework Enhancement Act says every agency has an obligation to furnish to the Office of Personnel Management a plan to decrease their footprint in in-person workspace and to allow people to work virtually more, because people do oftentimes better work, oftentimes just as good, when they don't have the additional stressors of commuting. People can spend all of their energy on the job. So it's interesting to see it misrepresented, because if you're in Congress, you're aware of this. You're the one that is in part responsible for making sure that the agencies are abiding by this mandate. And it's one of the reasons that people, I think, misrepresent it is really interesting too, because we talked about how people could be making more, but there's another side to that coin that's really interesting, which is through through federal employment, there are people that have had opportunities to grow in professional class jobs that wouldn't have had otherwise. And so you look at decades and decades ago, where women were barred from professional white-collar employment or employment that had meaningful career ladder opportunities. Those opportunities were sometimes open for the first time in the federal government. The same thing for Black folks, particularly for women of color, when those two categories intersect. And you've seen people that do the work and do the work well and have flourished in the federal government, I think, be subject to some resentment by folks that would not want to see those opportunities be granted. So it's interesting, because they're opposite sides of a coin. One is that people could oftentimes be doing better otherwise, but the other is that through having a clean and merit-based bureaucracy, merit system program, folks get rewarded for the work without being discriminated against based on their gender or their race, and the ceilings are higher. They can progress based on their ability to do the job. And I think there's a little bit of resentment to that as well.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Do you hear, I know that AFGE has a very robust kind of lobbying program and trying to build relationships with people in Congress. Is there any indication from the Republican caucus that they recognize that a lot of this is BS and they don't actually want to execute on it? Because I've listened to these, again, on the telework thing, I've listened to half a dozen hearings, congressional hearings on telework, expecting at least one congressperson to come to the table with at least one statistic showing that at least in one agency, federal workers have been, with the opportunity to telework more, less productive or succeeding, seeing less mission success. Every time I expected to see at least one congressperson highlight one statistic from one agency showing that. And it has never happened. I've watched half a dozen of these things, 12 hours of congressional hearings on telework. And none of them have brought any data about decreasing productivity. On the headcount reductions, in Huntsville, at minimum 10% of all workers in the city are directly employed by the federal government. If you saw a 50% headcount reduction, 75% headcount reduction, we would see like Great Recession level economic downturns in the city where I live. I mean, are you seeing any indication within the Republican caucus that like, yeah, this is kind of BS, we're not actually going to do this, or are they buying it, or at least pretending to buy it? What are you seeing?
I think it's interesting. I guess a three-part answer to that. One is when you talk about the impact that would happen to folks in this country if the administration were to deliver on its promise of cutting the federal workforce, it is an attack on the American people. Not only in that all of the millions of people who work for the federal government are Americans who are putatively people that would be get entitled to representation and advocacy from their own government. But also, again, the work that we do is so woven into the fabric of every portion of people's lives that it undergirds commerce, a social safety net, healthy food, healthy water, national security. Everything is buttressed in part by the work that the federal government does. The other thing I would say is when you see agencies talk about the work that their employees do, that federal employees do remotely, they can't but acknowledge the fact that productivity rates are as high or higher when people are working remotely, because that's what justifies the change. And it makes whatever mission it is that they have easier to do. It is hard for me to say whether or not anybody in the Republican caucus does or doesn't buy it. But here's what I will say. There are federal employees everywhere in this country. There isn't a congressional district that doesn't have a significant portion of folks that are federal employees and are members of AFGE. When you look at the CLCs and state feds that the AFL has spread out across the country, in 10 states, AFGE is the biggest labor union, because in right-to-work states, there are tons of federal employees working at military bases, working at the VA, working at HUD, working at USDA, working at GSA, and they understand the value of having a voice on the job. And so wherever there are Congress people, it's not our lobbyists that are talking. We have great lobbyists. We've got great lobbyists. We've got great lawyers. We've got great staff. I'm privileged to be one of them. But the thing that winds up making the difference, and I think the thing that's going to make a difference, is that there are Americans who are union members with our union everywhere, and they do work that, when they have conversations with their elected folks, oftentimes get seen and understood differently. If I'm a hard right Republican who imagines that, and I've heard this phrase for a long time, but heard a lot lately. Pencil pushing bureaucrats that do work that's hard for me to conceive of, with esoteric and half understood attacks on studies on the mating habits of fruit flies that winds up yielding research that winds up benefiting everybody anyway. I don't have any confusion or any abstraction when I talk to somebody who is in my district, who is a correctional officer, who I see value in the work they do, or who works in the VA and may see me and may be my doctor or my nurse, or the person that helps work in the cafeteria when I'm there. And so like I'll go to labor. I think the way that we stand the best chance of moving forward with this isn't just by having the staff drive it, but I think by having and this has been the origin of our success in the past, by having our members talk to the representatives where they are, not coming to DC. They're always welcome in DC, but by talking to them in their districts as constituents that are being impacted. And I think in that way, it's easier to cut through the incentivized attacks on the imaginary federal employees when you're talking to a real federal employee.
Right. And so, AFGE has been aggressively trying to, develop its membership over the last 3 or 4 years. This year we broke 300,000 members. And the plan is to hit 325,000 this year to try to get 25,000 new members. How did that happen? How did we hit 300,000 members?
That's a great question, and I appreciate being asked. I will say, actually, AFGE was the fastest growing large union in the country last year. And the way we do that is by the way we build real power, and it's not just a numbers game, it's a power game, as labor is when done right. We have dozens of staff and organizers, and we can't grow the union in a statistically meaningful way or in a way that yields meaningful power necessarily without having most of the work of that growth in those conversations be distributive organizing, where it's workers talking to workers. So if we as organizers are doing our job right, we're like basketball coaches that are standing on the court trying to work ourselves out of a job by building up the workers that are doing the organizing. And so what we've had is clusters of organized workers talking to each other in agency after agency and facility after facility and shift after shift and position description after position description, talking about building power together, about the things that matter to them and getting involved. And if I were to talk to, the 3 million federal employees about the things that I think they care about, it would resonate with some of them, but certainly not all, because the things that matter to people when they're improving their material conditions are deeply personal and deeply individual. Somebody may care about a boss that is, giving all the good holiday leave to their fishing buddies. Somebody else may care about the fact that, when they try to leave their parking lot, try to leave work in their parking lot isn't sufficiently lit and it's not safe and people are falling down, getting hurt. Some people may care about the fact that they're under attack and they need job security. Everybody cares about different things. It's deeply personal. And so when we see workers having these conversations, it's completely ground up because the things that are motivating people to get involved, the things that are motivating people to join, and the things that are motivating people to move their union are all unique. They're all individual. But when they're coming together, there's enough commonality and there's enough shared interest that we're seeing real power. And as a result of that, we've seen legislative wins and contract wins that are unique. The biggest pay raise federal employees have had in 40 years across the board in recent years. For our TSA workers, the biggest raise for federal employees ever. And that's not a result of our lobbyists or our lawyers or our contract negotiators. It's a result of all the members standing shoulder to shoulder and really demanding it. And doing so in great numbers. I remember I've negotiated contracts on behalf of AFGE. And I sat down once for a small unit that didn't have very much density. When I say union density, I mean out of the group of people that were eligible to be in the union, many of them weren't. They hadn't joined up, they hadn't signed up. And it's not just that they weren't paying dues, they weren't involved. And so I sit down to negotiate about a side issue, and I hand the union demands to their chief negotiator. And he looks at them and he tosses them back at me from across the table. He says, "I don't need to say yes to any of this." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Because it's what you want. The people in the union don't want it. They don't care. If they cared, they'd be members. They'd be here. But instead, I'm talking to you. So I can say no to you." And all of AFGE's growth is based on changing that model, because it's very easy to say no to me. I don't want anyone to be talking to me in the first place. Nobody should be. They should be talking to 800,000 federal employees. And that's the path that we're taking. And we're seeing, not only did we see success in the past, but facing an existential threat to the work that the federal government does, and particularly vicious attacks on their labor movement, particularly vicious attacks on their union rights, particularly vicious attacks on the rights at work, we're going to have that level of solidarity. I'm optimistic. I'm bullish on our members.
And so, what are some of the, and just to add a couple other of the recent wins from AFGE, in 2023, AFGE secured a very strong contract with the EPA, protecting scientific integrity for the workers there. Social Security Administration just got agreed to a contract extension to protect telework. And so, thinking about the next 2 or 3, 4 years, what are some of the plans that AFGE is developing with its locals, councils, and regions to protect federal workers and the public that we serve in a second Trump administration?
I can talk about some, but I think I'm better off not talking about all of them. So what I'll say is this. We know a lot of the attacks that we're going to face. There were executive orders that attacked our right to have robust collective bargaining. There were executive orders from the Trump administration last time that attacked our ability to engage in representation on the job and the scope of the things that workers were allowed to represent each other over. There were attacks on individuals that were union activists to keep them quiet and to keep them scared. And our plans are fundamentally to make sure that, to the extent that we can, our union is independent, our union is strong, and our union is plugged into the rest of the movement, so that we are visible, empowered, and vocal universally. And I talked a little bit about what that looks like legislatively. It's about making sure that all of the people that are in the communities across the country where they have elected officials that have to decide on whether or not they want to attack their constituents or not, are having conversations with the people that they represent and are aware of the fact that they'd be causing harm to themselves and their communities. But from an organizing standpoint, and maybe it's because when you're an organizer, everything looks like a nail, to sort of mutilate the term. The answer is more organizing. The answer is making sure that all of the things we want to see improved are the things that our members are telling us they care about, and all the things we want to see defended are the things that our members are saying that they care about. And as a result of that, the percentage of people that show up and are willing to invest their time, energy, and themselves in having a voice and seeing improvements is a universal one. And our, in recent months, as folks have seen the attacks coming, we've had people flocking towards each other instead of running away from each other. And not just that we're growing in number, but we're growing in power, because people really understand that when it comes to protecting workers in the federal government, nobody is coming. The people that are going to protect workers in the federal government are federal workers. And we have the power to make a difference, and we have the power to defend ourselves. But we have to do it in a smart, organized, and coordinated way.
If I'm a federal employee listening to this, how do I get plugged in to my union?
That's a great question. I think the first thing you want to do is you want to go to join.afg.org. You want to check to see if you're a part of a bargaining unit that's already represented. The folks that are eligible to be in unions that are not currently is by a great degree more folks that are already represented but haven't joined as members. If you're not, feel free to reach out, and we can look into bringing you into the AFG family. I do want to say I'm not maligning other federal labor unions. Any group of workers that are standing together to have a voice are people I respect and people that are friends of mine. I'm an AFG guy, and I like to see AFG grow. I think we're great at what we do. But if you're eligible to join another bargaining unit, do it fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, and I am I'm pretty close with the local IFPTE president here, and we try to talk, about how our respective unions are doing, what we can learn from one another, and how we can support one another. And I think that's all really important, because ultimately it doesn't matter to me, and I think to you, what the initials of your union are, as long as you're in a union and you're part of the movement and we're all supporting each other. And so but yeah, if you're in an AFGE unit, you should join AFGE. So join.afge.org.
Yes,
so
sir.
Dave Cann, is there anything else that you wanted to make sure that you shared with us before we let you go?
I want to thank you for what you do. I got to listen to the tail end of the previous segment, and I think one of the things that's difficult now is there is so much energy and money and time invested in making sure that people aren't talking about representing their own interests as workers and not having a voice on the job. And everybody that's devoting the energy and time to making sure that we're talking about the things that matter to folks and that they're having power at work and power as individuals and power as a class is doing God's work. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Dave Cann, National Organizing Director, American Federation of Government Employees. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fg.